On today's show, we're going to be talking about that religious concept to bear one's own cross. Just what does it mean? And how is this term misused? Or, I often wonder if the term bearing one's own cross can be distorted and used to manipulate people. Kind of like what happens when people try to get other people to enable them in their addictions, for example, is a prime example. But just how do we understand the concept to bear one's own cross? And just what does it mean? And can one strive to be a healthy and whole human being? Or does one take almost a suffering martyr concept to bear one's own cross? How does we really understand that in the light of the gospel? Jesus healed people. Jesus helped people reclaim their lives. He healed incurable diseases. So, to go to the extreme to think to bear one's own cross is to simply accept suffering without the desire to overcome suffering, I think that's a distortion of what that term actually means.
Well, the meta-narrative for the term comes from the Passion narrative, where we read in the Gospels that after his conviction and sentencing, after his scourging, that Jesus Christ was forced to carry his own cross through the streets to Golgotha. It's a common image in the Christian narrative. In one of the Gospels, Jesus stumbles and somebody helps him, picks up the cross for a time with him. So it's odd in our tradition. The Passion is at the center of the revelation. What does the crucifixion mean? What's it really pointing to? Jesus Christ accepted the judgment. He wasn't passive about it. We have words in the Eucharistic prayer that indicate that. He wasn't passive about it. He wasn't submissive. But rather, he took it upon himself. What was the alternative? Well, lots of Christians would say, I think, the alternative would be to call down angels from heaven and have a battle. But that's not what happens in the narrative. So the central spiritual image, it seems to me, Vladimir, is that, as we see it in Jesus Christ, the bearing of one's own cross is the hope that life will be pulled from death.
Okay.
That whoever has put you in this position, for whatever reasons, no matter how unjust, no matter how foolish, no matter how sinful, that instead of reacting to it, instead of resisting, as we normally understand that term, we see in the narrative of the Passion a taking it upon himself, and I would say with the hope of the resurrection, with the hope of pulling life from it and not allowing death to determine what the final story is here. So when this is used as a trope by people in their neurosis, in their suffering, to get somebody else to simply put up with them,
Yep.
then obviously this is an attempt to manipulate religious imagery.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we are called to bear each other's burdens.
Mm-hmm.
We are called to forgive 70 times 70,
Mm-hmm.
which really means always. We are called not to react, not to simply be reactive. What does that require? Well, that requires a mind. The whole Revelation is saying the way God created you is such that you don't have to react, because God didn't create your ego.
Mm-hmm.
God didn't create your image of yourself. God created you, who you are, and that is not the image of yourself. The image of yourself you need to defend. The image of yourself you need to make present in the world. But your being? No. Your being is, because it was created by God. So the person that is in the spiritual condition of not reacting, that is the person who is in the condition of freedom, the condition they were actually created in. Freedom opens the opportunity to bear the burdens of others appropriately.
Okay, go on.
Appropriately. Not so that it deepens their neurosis, but so that it shows that they are loved and that they too can come to be healed, so they are not acting out of their neurosis. So to bear one's cross is a wonderful image, a wonderful religious teaching about how even in the most cruel of circumstances, and crucifixion was developed by the Romans not as a way of killing people, but as a way of torturing them to death.
Mm-hmm.
It's a horrific way to die. Horrific. Even in the most awful circumstances, to not be in the stance of reacting. To be in the stance of freedom, where you see that this is born out of a passion which is robbing the persecutor of their own life. They are the living hell already. And through being present to them, as Jesus Christ was, even from the cross, being present to them, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. There is some chance that they will wake up, that they will realize that they are acting out of a passion, that they're acting out of enmity, and that that's not who they are. So in the biblical narrative, I often like to say. I mean, we can say this in so many different ways, but in one sense, the Roman centurion, Longinus, who stands at the foot of the cross, and in some narratives, he's the one who put the spear in the side of Jesus Christ. He hears the Master of the universe say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He hears that. In that moment, he hears that. And that calls forth from him. Truly, this is the Son of God. So, my sense is that a healthy notion of bearing your own cross is a way of saying, a way of inviting us not to react to the sufferings that come along our path, not to take them personally, not to assume that somehow or other this means the world is pitted against us, but it's to invite us to be present even to those sufferings and to seek to pull life from what so appears to be death.
But is there a limit to bearing one's own cross? Is there a limit of bearing or helping somebody else? Is self-preservation wrong? Is looking after yourself wrong? Is wanting to overcome a disease wrong? Some people have taken to the extreme example, and there are some denominations that say you should not go see a doctor because if you have a sickness, this is God's will for you. But yet, Jesus healed in the Gospels, so that can't be true. Or to bear one's own cross, let's say the people in power are very corrupt and they're harming the people. The Old Testament prophets spoke up and defended the widow, defended the alien, defended the homeless, defended the downtrodden. To them, that wasn't their cross to endure abuse, but to stand up and call out those in power what they were doing. I mean, look at the Old Testament prophets. Some of them could be pretty vocal. So was it their cross to speak up on injustices, or was it their cross to simply endure and put up and to say, this is God's will, I just have to put up with it? Or is it God's will that I have to do something about it?
Right. So first of all, at the center of Orthodox spiritual thought is the notion that God never gives up on us.
Okay.
That God always endures. That there are no limits to God's love. None. There is nothing we can do to alienate God from us. But we have freedom and can be alienated from God. But that's our choice, not how we understand the divine. The divine is always there, always wooing us. So it's important to keep that in mind. But we aren't God. We're human beings. We're in the image of God, but we are not God. So I can just say, from the perspective of my own experience, it is possible for certain kinds of human relationships to develop in which a person sees you as having to bear your cross, which is their problems, and in which that relationship is profoundly neurotic. Two things are going on there. One is what that person thinks. That person thinks you ought to be their savior.
Yes.
We are nobody's savior.
Agreed.
The second thing is that you may think you are their savior. This is a common human problem, particularly for compassionate people. And it, of course, is overreaching. And, of course, it is born out of spiritual pride. And where that kind of spiritual knot develops between two people, it seems to me, I don't know, and every case is different, but I have known in my own life, there have been some occasions where I have come to realize, finally, that all I could do and what I must do is depart.
Okay. So it's okay to walk away.
It's not that I wish to walk away. It's that to not do that was to simply deepen the suffering and was to indulge my own illusions that I could somehow be the savior.
Agreed.
But that's not easy, because that kind of way a relationship can come to be constructed is deeply troubled. And there are two that are party to it. And both of them have a passion. So that's, to my mind, there are reasons why, a number of people went to the desert or went to monasteries. And I suspect one of the reasons is that they were caught up in various kinds of relationships, which were impossible to untie, impossible to set right. They did not have the wisdom or the skill or the capacity to do it other than the way they were. And so the only thing they could do was walk away.